move on to the fourth presentation by Dr. Richard Pountney about the post-COVID recovery curriculum. Let's welcome.
Thank you. I trust you can hear me okay. I'm going to share my screen if I can. Yes, and excuse me a moment. Yeah, that's better. So I think Wiping, can you just confirm that you can see my PowerPoint slide full screen?
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to talk about an approach to a recovery curriculum. I'm Richard Pountney, and I'm a senior lecturer in curriculum development at Sheffield Institute of Education, Sheffield Hallam University. And my talk is related to my paper for the special issue. I'll outline the context and the conceptual basis of my analysis, but I will not have time to go into the details of my findings. I'm going to talk about what happened at lockdown and its effects on young people and their education. I then outline the responses that are being made and the form that catching up, as it's referred to, is taking. I will examine what is being recovered, what exactly is being recovered in this approach, and I'll outline one particular intervention, that's the GROW programme for years 10 and 11 in pupils in South Yorkshire schools in England. And I will share, I'll start to share the conceptualization of this intervention and how the effects of this are theorized. And I'll finish by outlining a holistic approach in schools and communities that can address the problem of a recovery curriculum. So I want to start with making a few comments about the effects of the pandemic, which I'm going to theorize as a form of disruption. The closure of schools owing to the COVID-19 pandemic on the 20th of March in England, save for on-site education for vulnerable children and children of critical workers, has impacted on education to a great degree. And I should say an apparent closure of schools, because my children who are teachers would not forgive me for saying that schools were closed. They weren't closed, they continued under very extreme circumstances. Their doors never closed, although that is a common conception, and I note in the media in the UK there is a great criticism of teachers for closing schools, which has never really happened. And I know this also from my own grandchildren who are at schools and how their education continues. However, the main issues facing school leaders in opening schools to whole year groups, practical issues with staffing and teaching, is in recent reports and journal publications, including how teachers feel unprepared to resume a range of activities and the danger of children missing out on schooling. So the phased return from the 1st of June includes priority for years 10 and 12 pupils preparing for important examinations. Those were cancelled in schools in the UK in the summer. Reduced timetables, some face-to-face contact, and support to supplement pupils' remote education. And there are basically three responses that I refer to in the paper, or options that schools took. They're not necessarily exclusive to each other, but making students' experience of home learning more equal, bringing students back into schools at different times, and offering extra resources. And I'm going to sort of just, as I say, refer to one particular approach. So how the disruption, my paper is about how the disruption is experienced by young people and how this is critical to their current and future education. The slide shown at the moment is one we use with pupils in the GROW programme, which is the intervention I'm going to talk about. There is a myth about catching up, referred to as the missing learning as a problematic concept. The idea that children stop learning when they're not in school. But of course, missing lessons is devastating, alongside some of the other effects of pandemic, such as losing family, which some of our pupils talk about. So I prefer recovery to catch up as the term. And underpinning this, which I'll unpack in the paper, is re-establishing the connection between social cultural knowledge and epistemic or academic knowledge. So that's a theoretical aspect of the paper that I'll talk about in the paper. but the long-term goal of getting over the effects of disruption. So the paper acknowledges the idea of adverse childhood experiences. Those range from physical, emotional, sexual abuses, neglect, household dysfunction. So these are forms of adverse childhood experiences. And I make the case that the disruption to schooling is, it may not be extreme as some of those that I've mentioned, but they are significant because these adverse childhood experiences can impact school performance and impair learning. And children who have experienced these may feel physical and emotional distress and effects on mental well-being. The slide, by the way, just highlights some important milestones in the pandemic, and I'll highlight a couple of them. So the 31st of January is the first UK case. 13th of March, all football was cancelled. This is important to some of our pupils, of course, as boys and girls. Schools closed, or they shut their doors in some senses on the 20th of March. We had a minute silence for key workers on the 28th of April. We introduced our test and trace program on the 27th of May. On the 30th of June, we were celebrating 100 days of lockdown. Celebration is the right word. On the 4th of July, we opened our pubs, gyms and hairdressers. The 14th of October, a three-tier approach was introduced, and South Yorkshire is in the highest tier. It is an area, South Yorkshire is an area of deprivation in the UK. It has some severe domestic and economic deprivations. And on the 5th of November, we entered a second national lockdown, even though schools were still open. I want to just highlight some of the what the literature says about some of the effects on this. This is a slide from major Generation COVID, which is a report just published by the Centre for Economic Performance. And what is clear is that many pupils have experienced a significant sustained reduction in their education. During April, nearly 3/4 of private schools were benefiting from full school days, nearly twice the proportion of state school pupils. There is a divide in the UK between private schools and state-funded schools. 1/4 of pupils had no schooling or tutoring during lockdown, and overall just under 4 in 10 pupils benefited from full schooling during full school closures due to lockdown by early 2020. So 6 in 10 pupils, only 6 in 10 pupils were benefiting from full schooling. So a significant proportion of pupils missed out on education altogether, and 1/4 of pupils had no schooling or tutoring during lockdown, which equates to about 2.5 million children across the UK. On average, pupils were receiving 42% of normal schooling during lockdown and 85% of normal schooling in the autumn. So there has been an increase in schooling, but the learning losses during a lockdown do appear to be particularly stark. This slide shows an OECD report, a recent one, which looked at countries' response to the pandemic and the strategies that they'd used. And they polled 36 countries, and these are self-reported focus on different areas of inclusion and equity during the school closures. I'll draw your attention to a couple. So they felt that to a great extent, the importance to ensure the continuity of academic learning. Lesser, but still important, to support education of disadvantaged students. And interestingly, the third highest in terms of importance was to ensure distribution of food to students, which is an indication that the material circumstances that pupils live under is a strong contributor to how they understand the world and how they experience it. So school closures have had a real impact on all students, but especially on the most vulnerable ones. And children and youth from low-income and single-parent families, immigrants, refugees, ethnic minority and indigenous backgrounds, all are suffering deprivation as a result of COVID-19. And these pupils, these students, the vulnerable ones, the report suggests, are those most likely to lose in terms of educational outcomes, and are dependent on the support that schools can offer. And it goes alongside an assessment of students' mental health and efforts to identify students that may be experiencing particular challenging circumstances and the need to counsel students. And recently, the Public Health England found that school engagement in particular does seem to have strong links with academic success and a child's level of well-being. I'm going to move on. So the UK government, and I note here the distinction between in the four nations, and how there is a difference in how some of this is taken up. So this next few slides refer mainly to England, but the UK government is favouring an approach in response to the issues, is favouring an approach that sees the learning gap to be addressed via subject tutoring. And the alarm that's arisen is from studies such as the NFER's sample of 3,000 school leaders, revealing that teachers they'd covered less than 70% of the curriculum by July 2020. And as a result, students are estimated to be 3 months behind on average in their learning. Moreover, the study suggests that boys are further behind in the curriculum compared to girls, and that the learning gap for disadvantaged students has widened to at least 46%. So the government responded by offering to fund 75% of the cost of tutors for in-need students. And the National Tutoring Programme, national, but in the first instance offered to schools in England, is it offers to support children left behind academically by disruption caused by the pandemic. So there are £350 million made available on something called the National Tutoring Programme, and this is a strong emphasis on tuition, tutoring school subjects, so particularly the core subjects. They also offer an approach to developing academic mentors, but again, the academic mentoring is a focus on say school learning, curriculum learning, subject learning, and subject knowledge. But there is an acknowledgement that we need to make an holistic approach, a sustained and holistic approach, and that a single approach will not be enough. And this leads me to the intervention that I'm going to talk about briefly, watching time. So the intervention that I am exploring in the paper is a graduate learning mentor program called GROW. And the aim of the study is to understand the effects of lockdown arising from the COVID-19 pandemic and the efficacy of this mentoring intervention. It was piloted in schools in June and July this year. That's mid the first lockdown, the first element of lockdown, and was piloted in 4 schools with 30 pupils. That's correct. And basically in the South Yorkshire region. So the Barnsley, if you know our geography, I guess some of you won't, Barnsley, Doncaster, Rotherham and Sheffield. The programme was based around this triangulation between schools, pupils and graduate mentors. So there were recent graduates from the university who were invited to take part as mentors, were trained to be mentors. They received 25 hours of training on key topics such as safeguarding, building relationships, working in schools, and particularly on an approach called trauma-informed, a trauma-informed approach. I'll talk about this in the paper, but I don't have time today. But if you want to know more about the programme, there's a link there, which I can, when I finish talking, I'll put into the chat, which sends you to a blog area which describes the programme more directly. So we consulted with schools, and they suggested that subject-specific tutoring would require specific pedagogical training. So as a pragmatic response, it was difficult to identify graduate mentors who could do a particular subject. But schools also felt they had their own subject experts in place, and what they really wanted was a response which helped them, which helped pupils get. Schools were aware of by the very difficult circumstances that pupils had experienced and how they needed to respond to that. So we co-designed, the program was co-designed with schools, drew on expertise in mentoring, which I'll talk about in the paper, based on trauma-informed principles, and trauma-informed education is a distinct area of its own. It was built around this 3-way partnership and used broadly the principles of Whitmore's principles of the GROW, goal, reality, options, and will. I'm not going to spend too long on this, but it was designed for learning. Mentors were encouraged to create relationships. So the importance of relationships was key. It looked at strengthening habits of work and learning, creating commitment. And again, if you're interested, you'll find these videos about the program on the website. So what did it involve? It lasted 7 weeks. There were 2 mentors per school, 2 graduate mentors per school, 15 hours per pupil, 15 pupils per mentor, and 2 hours per week per pupil. And the program took place in a tool, an online tool. It's completely online, and it took place in a tool called Bramble, which I can give you the link to. So it tended to deal with the return to school, positive habits of work and learning, some careers advice and guidance, but a deal of personal development, including metacognitive strategies. So this is a sort of poster that we use to show the outline of the program, and you can see that the 7 weeks are mapped out here with a number of experiences of activities that the pupils use. In a moment, I'm going to play, if I can, White Pain, I'm going to play a very quick, short video, which gives you a real flavour of what the kind of activities took place. It only lasts a minute, and then I'll move on to the theorization, conceptualization, if you don't mind. So I'm going to stop. I'm going to close my slide, and I'm going to see if I can. Oh, yeah, I've got that one in. So I think this is. I'm still sharing. Excuse me a moment. I'm going to do that again and share computer sound. So, White Pig, can you just confirm that you can see the video on the screen at the moment?
No.
Yes?
No, we can.
Okay, just give me a moment.
Or you may play it at the end.
I think I know it. Is that better?
No. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, thank you.
What names can you give me?
Well, it's hard for everyone because like everyone's had to like do this online thing, and then some people might not be used to it. But like we all have to do it in order to stay safe.
Who would be the first person out of those people you would contact or talk to?
Probably Laura.
How do you feel like, what grades do you feel do you need at GCSE to make your plan happen?
Well, definitely free maths.
Vision cards, yeah, that's a good one. Do you have a library at school or anything like that?
Yeah.
Or?
What about then aspirations? What do you want to do when you're older? I know that sounds so cheesy, but
I want to be an environmental health officer.
Okay.
It seems interesting when I learn about
I think it's very similar for probably most people in your school as well, right? What about any of the other ones then? Did you ever do the clap for carers or?
Would you have like 5 people that were like you wanted to check in on, or you wanted to make sure we're doing all right?
Yeah, I would text my friends regularly, see how they're doing.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, I'm a family guy.
To work on. I think I am like really positive about where I want to be. Like I don't try and say, oh, I hope I'm gonna do this. I like to say I will do it.
Yeah.
It makes me a bit more confident in it.
Yeah,
So
that's
you'll
really
have achieved
good.
your skills builder badge, which is great. You've only got one more to go, and then you'll get that certificate at the end.
So I'm going to just close that off. Put back to my slides for a moment. Oops, sorry. I'm going to finish off very briefly by talking about, forgive me, I'm going to talk very briefly about the theorization of the program. So in the last couple of minutes, there are 2 concepts that I use in the theorization: academic buoyancy and academic resilience. and the importance of academic resilience for vulnerable children who experience acute adversity, and how academic buoyancy might be related to low-level negative outcomes such as achievement, but weaker resilience is predictive of high negative outcomes. I used the 5C model of academic resilience involving confidence, coordination, control, composure, and commitment. I also draw on the positive youth development conceptual framework, looking at how positive youth development affects recovery, and identify several of the concepts such as resilience, self-determination, and belief in the future as being key to this. And the analysis is based on 250 recorded tutoring sessions, interviews with tutors and teachers, and responses made by the 40 pupils. An increase in engagement by pupils, the re-establishment of routines, a clear indication in the analysis of pupils' readiness and motivations towards being tutored by graduates who are closer in age to them, turn taking, and the level of confidence in articulating their own futures was really, really important. And finally, that in the paper, I'll draw attention to this, how children acquire their own sense of the purpose of the curriculum from the response to disruption made by the communities and the schools, and that how they interpret, internalize, and make meanings from adversity is mediated by these responses. In other words, there's a symbiotic relationship between the response made by society to disruption and experiences by children and how their understandings are made. So I'm going to stop sharing and say, I'll put my email address and the link to some of those things in the chat, but I'll pass back to Wai Ping for the next session.